My name is Linda Morgan, and I am 68 years old. For most of my life, I worked long shifts as a nurse in Atlanta, Georgia. I was the kind of nurse who missed birthdays, weekends, and even Christmas mornings because someone else's family needed care. I never really minded. My whole purpose was to keep a roof over my son's head and food on our table. When my husband walked out, Brian was only 5 years old. He was a little boy with wide eyes who believed his mama could fix anything. And I was determined not to prove him wrong. I picked up double shifts, sometimes going from nights straight into mornings, running on coffee and sheer willpower. There were nights when I tucked him into bed and promised that tomorrow would be easier, even if I wasn't sure it would be. Our house back then was small, nothing fancy, but it was ours. That place saw scraped knees patched on the kitchen floor, birthday candles stuck into grocery store cakes, and quiet moments where Brian wrapped his arms around me and told me I was his hero. Those words carried me through exhaustion and loneliness more than he will ever know. I never remarried. Men came and went, but my heart belonged to raising my son. I thought that if I poured every ounce of love and sacrifice into him, he would grow into a man who understood loyalty, who valued honesty, who treated family as sacred. And when he married Melissa, I convinced myself she would be the partner who stood beside him with the same values. In the beginning, she was charming, all smiles and politeness. I welcomed her like a daughter. When they suggested moving in with me, saying it would be easier to care for me as I grew older, I thought it was a blessing. I imagined laughter in the house again, the comfort of family meals, the peace of knowing I wasn't alone. But something shifted over time. Melissa quietly took control of the household finances, insisting she could manage them better. Brian began to pull away, less patient, sometimes irritated when I asked small questions. I even gave them $700 each month from my pension, thinking it would bring peace. I told myself it was a gesture of love, but I overheard them call it crumbs. I brushed aside those sharp edges. That's what mothers do. We make excuses. We hope things will improve. We cling to the belief that our children still see us as the heart of their world. But I had no idea how quickly that illusion was about to shatter. I thought I had seen every kind of suffering in the hospital. What I didn't realize was that the deepest kind of betrayal could come from within your own walls. And it all began with a simple repair. For weeks, my home security cameras had been broken. I told myself it was nothing urgent, but there was a quiet unease that lingered. At 68, you start to pay attention to those small gut feelings. I finally called a technician, and he came by, replaced the system, and installed an app on my phone so I could check the house in real time. I didn't think much of it at the time. It felt like one of those little chores you put off until you finally cross it off the list. I never imagined how much that small decision would change everything. The next morning, Brian and Melissa mentioned they had things to do. He said something about a job interview, and she said she needed to go to the store. I wished them well, then made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen. It was still early, and a quiet nudge in my mind reminded me that I hadn't checked if the cameras were working. Out of habit, more than suspicion, I tapped the app on my phone. I froze. There they were. Not out of the house like they said. They were sitting in my living room. My personal folders and papers spread across the coffee table as if they were sorting through their own belongings. My first instinct was confusion. Maybe they were looking for a bill, or maybe they needed a document for something important. I wanted so badly to believe it was innocent. But then I heard Melissa's voice, calm and commanding, asking about the original deed. Something inside me went cold. She didn't sound curious. She sounded determined. And then Brian's words followed words that cut me deeper than any scalpel I had ever held during my years in the hospital. He said that I kept everything organized, and if they kept looking, they would find it. In that moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. They weren't helping me. They weren't curious. They were searching for the key to take away the very home I had built over 30 years of sacrifice. I felt my heart pounding as I watched the screen, tea cooling in my hands. I had spent my life believing that family was my safe place, that my son, the little boy who once clung to me and called me his hero, would never turn into someone who saw me as an obstacle. Yet here he was, treating my careful habits the same discipline that kept our lives afloat as weaknesses to exploit. Melissa lifted one of my papers to the light, and I caught the faint smile on her face. She was calculating, already speaking about how much the property was worth and how easily they could sell it once it was in their names. She even said that a small one-bedroom would be enough for me in my last years. Her words made my chest tighten. To her, I wasn't a person. I was an inconvenience, something to downsize. Brian paced the room like a restless stranger, not like the son I raised. He spoke about me as though I were already fading, as though confusion and age would be easy tools to manipulate. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I was too old, too trusting, too tired. I sat there at my kitchen table, gripping the phone, realizing my reality had shifted in a matter of minutes. My home, my papers, my trust, all of it had become their target. I wanted to rush in, confront them, demand answers. But another part of me whispered to stay still, to watch, to understand exactly what I was up against. That was the first real fracture in the illusion I had clung to for so long. And it was only the beginning. From that day on, I began to see everything differently. I no longer looked at Brian and Melissa as the loving couple who moved in to take care of me. I watched them as if they were strangers under my roof, waiting for them to reveal more of their true intentions. The cameras became my lifeline, late at night, when the house grew still. I would sit in my bedroom with the glow of my phone lighting up the darkness. I watched them whisper when they thought I was asleep. I watched Melissa scribbling notes into a small spiral notebook while Brian paced, chewing his nails just like he did as a boy. But this wasn't nervous energy over homework or sports. This was plotting. This was my own child, conspiring against me. It didn't take long for me to hear another name surface. Anthony. I remembered meeting him once in passing when Brian called him a friend from a bar. I had felt uneasy then, a slickness in his smile that made my stomach twist. Now, I finally understood why. He was the shadow guiding them. The man who said he could forge documents if only they got their hands on the original deed. Melissa's voice carried a cold certainty when she spoke about the value of the house. To her, it wasn't a home filled with decades of memories. It was a number. Over $5,000, she reminded Brian. Enough for them to sell and start fresh, while leaving me tucked away in some small apartment. I can't describe the kind of pain those words brought me. To hear the people you love most in the world talk about you as if you are an inconvenience, as if your life is just a detail in their bigger plan, it breaks something inside you. But what stung even more came from Brian himself. He started talking about how I sometimes forgot small things, like where I left my glasses or the date on a calendar. To him, that was proof I was slipping, that I could be manipulated. My own son was preparing to use my age against me, twisting my humanity into weakness. I wanted to cry, to storm out and confront them, but I stayed still. Instead, I took note of every detail, every careless word. I realized that if I showed my hand too soon, I would lose the only advantage I had. They thought I was clueless. Then came the cruelest twist of all. I overheard Brian on the phone one evening, speaking with my doctor. He was carefully planting seeds, saying I was paranoid, that I imagined things, that I had installed cameras because I believed they were conspiring against me. His words were smooth, convincing, the kind any outsider might believe. And then Melissa joined in, loudly enough for me to hear, making remarks about me repeating questions, forgetting dates, talking to myself. Together, they were building a story that I was unstable, that I was no longer capable of handling my own life. For a while, I almost doubted myself. When people you love insist you're confused, it starts to creep in. But then I caught my reflection one night in the dark window of my bedroom. I looked tired. Yes, but my eyes were sharp, and my mind was clear. I knew exactly what I was hearing, exactly what they were doing, and I refused to let them rewrite my reality. So I took control in the only way I could. I called my doctor privately and asked for a full evaluation. I sat through every test, every question. Memory, reasoning, problem solving. I answered each with clarity. And when it was done, my doctor looked at me with reassurance. She told me I had one of the sharpest minds she had seen at my age. She even documented it formally. In that moment, relief washed over me. Their lies couldn't erase that. I walked out of that office with a paper that felt like armor. For the first time in weeks, I had something solid on my side. A truth they could not twist. Back home, I watched Brian and Melissa continue their whispers, their plotting, their attempts to tighten the noose. But I no longer felt powerless. Each night, as I sat with the glow of the camera app, I felt my resolve hardening. They believed they had me cornered. That age and confusion would work in their favor. What they didn't understand was that mothers learn to endure more than anyone can imagine. I had carried Brian through illness, through scraped knees, through heartbreak. I had worked double shifts, held our lives together with sheer grit. If they wanted to push me into a corner, they had underestimated the wrong woman. I was ready to defend not only my home, but my dignity. And just when I thought I understood the extent of their cruelty, they changed tactics once more, setting the stage for the moment I decided I wouldn't just defend myself. I would fight back. By the time Brian and Melissa started calling me unstable, I knew I had to change my approach. If I kept waiting, they would twist every detail until I was trapped in their story. I needed proof, something undeniable. That was when my doctor connected me with a private investigator, Richard Lawson. He was calm, professional, and had the kind of steady presence that made me feel less alone. He listened as I explained everything, and when I finished, he said words that both terrified and comforted me. This was financial elder abuse. He had seen it before, and if I was willing, he could help me collect the kind of evidence that would hold up in court. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Richard and a technician returned a few days later. They installed 2 hidden cameras in the living and dining rooms, so well concealed that even I couldn't spot them once they were in place. He handed me a tiny microphone, no bigger than a button, and showed me how to clip it inside my blouse. All I needed to do, he said, was live as I normally did. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. So I became an actress in my own home. to Brian and Melissa. I was still the aging mother who shuffled around, asked too many questions, and smiled politely when they simplified things for me. Inside, though, I was sharper than I had been in years. Every word they said, every look they exchanged, I stored away as evidence. I pretended to lean on Melissa for help with groceries. I pretended to accept Brian's explanations about bills, nodding as if I couldn't understand the numbers. Every sigh of impatience, every condescending glance, I let it pass, because I knew more was coming. And it did. One afternoon, I told them I was finally ready to review the papers they had been pushing at me. Their reaction was immediate, like children being handed presents. Melissa rushed to gather the documents, smoothing the pages with confidence. Brian placed a pen carefully beside them, speaking in that soft, rehearsed tone he used when he wanted to sound trustworthy. They believed they had me right where they wanted me. What they didn't know was that every word was being recorded, every move captured. My microphone was live, and the hidden cameras were rolling. I sat at the dining table, the sunlight pouring in through the windows, but the air felt heavy, thick with tension. My hands trembled slightly as I touched the papers, but not from fear this time, it was anticipation. Melissa explained quickly, skimming over the details, calling it standard language. She spoke about how it would allow them to make decisions for me if I couldn't do it myself. Brian chimed in, talking about protecting me, about making sure my future was secure. But I heard what they weren't saying. I heard the urgency, the hunger, the impatience buried in their voices. I leaned in, feigning confusion, asking small questions, repeating phrases as though I was slow to understand. I could see the flicker of frustration in Brian's eyes, the tightness in his jaw. Melissa grew sharper, her tone edging toward irritation, talking about how once the house was sold, they could build a better future for all of us. That was the moment my heart shifted. Their masks slipped completely. They no longer even pretended this was for me, it was about them, their comfort, their ambitions, their vision of a future where I was neatly tucked away and forgotten. When Brian finally blurted out that they had lived on my crumbs long enough, I felt something inside me settle. The little boy I once cradled was gone. What sat across from me was a man who believed he deserved everything I had worked for, as if sacrifice had an expiration date. Melissa pressed harder, reminding Brian to stay strong, saying that one way or another, the house would be theirs. She even mentioned Anthony had the paperwork ready to declare me incompetent if I refused to sign. Her voice was icy, certain, merciless, and that was when I knew the time had come. I placed the pen back on the table, letting silence hang for just a moment. Then I told myself to stay calm, to remember the plan. I looked at them both, letting the weight of their betrayal sink in one last time. And just as their confidence reached its peak, the front door opened. Richard Lawson walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers and my attorney. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Brian froze, his face pale. Melissa's expression twisted from confidence to rage in an instant. As the officers stepped forward, the words were spoken. They were under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted forgery, and elder financial abuse. I sat there quietly, my hands resting in my lap, watching as the scene unfolded. Melissa spat accusations, claiming I had tricked them, but the truth was clear. They had tricked themselves, blinded by greed and entitlement. Brian turned to me, his eyes wide, pleading. He begged me to stop it, reminding me that he was my son. And for the first time in my life, those words did not hold me hostage, because I knew that a true son does not steal from his mother, does not plot to erase her life's work. I told myself to stay steady, not to let the moment drown in tears. They had already taken enough from me. I would not let them take my dignity, too. As the handcuffs clicked, I felt an enormous weight lift off my chest. For months, I had lived in fear and silence. Now, at last, the truth was in the open. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe. But the story didn't end with their arrest. There was still the aftermath, the questions from neighbors, the process of reclaiming my peace, and the lesson I carried with me from it all. The days after their arrest felt strangely quiet. For months, I had lived under the constant hum of suspicion, the tension of watching my own family plot behind closed doors. Now the silence was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. The legal process unfolded slowly, but I had Richard and my attorney guiding me through each step. The recordings, the hidden cameras, the signed evaluation from my doctor, together, they built a case that was impossible to deny. Brian and Melissa had underestimated me, and now every careless word, every cruel plan, was preserved as evidence. They eventually struck a deal. Instead of facing a decade in prison, they accepted 18 months behind bars. As part of the agreement, they also signed away any future claim to my property and were ordered to stay away from me permanently. The court's decision should have felt like victory, but in truth, it was bittersweet. Some neighbors asked me if I regretted it. After all, Brian was my only son. How could I sit there in court and watch him be led away in handcuffs? How could I choose justice over blood? But the truth is, I didn't regret being a mother. I only regretted not realizing sooner that motherhood does not mean allowing yourself to be destroyed. I had given him everything: my time, my health, my sacrifices, my love, and still, he chose greed over loyalty. That choice was his, not mine. When I returned home after the sentencing, I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. For the first time in months, my house felt like it belonged to me again. No more whispers in the hallways, no more lies spoken just out of earshot, just quiet, honest air. I found myself breathing deeper, moving lighter. I began tending to my garden again, planting flowers that I had neglected during the chaos. I started sharing meals with neighbors, people who had shown me more kindness in small gestures than my own family had offered in years. In that simple rhythm, I rediscovered something I thought I had lost: peace. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity. It was about reminding myself, and anyone who might be listening, that love without respect is not love at all. As I sat one evening in my armchair, the same chair where I once cradled Brian when he was frightened as a child, I thought about how life had turned. The memories of his little arms wrapped around my neck still lived inside me. But the man he became made a different choice. I had to accept that sometimes protecting your peace means letting go of the people you thought you loved the most. And so I did. The pain was real, but the freedom was real too. And with every sunrise that filled my quiet home, I felt stronger. Because survival isn't just about holding on. Sometimes, survival is about knowing when to let go. I thought the hardest part was behind me. But there was still one more step left in my journey, turning this story of betrayal into a lesson about family, dignity, and what it truly means to find peace. Looking back now, I've learned that family is not defined by blood alone. Family is built on respect, honesty, and genuine love. Without those things, the word means very little. I still live in my home, the same house I worked decades to build. I tend my garden. I share meals with neighbors who have become like family. And I find joy in the smallest things, things no one can steal. My peace is no longer tied to who stays or who leaves. It belongs to me. If you've ever faced betrayal, I want you to know something important. You are not alone. Your dignity matters. Your voice matters. And no one has the right to strip that away. If my story touched your heart, I would be grateful if you take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need courage today, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know how far this story travels.